I'm Isla, 28 female. I live alone in a small but quiet apartment, and my job as an archivist for the city's historical society is my sanctuary. It's a world of paper, ink, and tangible history, a world where facts are preserved and stories are given the respect they deserve. This job became my refuge from a family that had long decided my own story wasn't worth listening to, labeling my struggles with anxiety and depression as nothing more than a childish plea for attention. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The silence in my apartment was a double-edged sword. Most days, it was a welcome buffer against the noise of the world and, more specifically, the noise of my family. On other days, like today, it was a hollow vessel, amplifying the echoes of their latest dismissals. I had just gotten off the phone with my mother, Linda. The conversation, like so many before it, had left me feeling drained and invisible. I'd tried to explain why I wouldn't be able to make the 2-hour drive for our impromptu family lunch this weekend. I explained that my anxiety had been particularly bad this week, that crowds were difficult, and that I needed some time to recharge my social battery. Her response was a familiar, chilly sigh. Isla, honestly, you're 28 years old. When are you going to grow out of this drama? It's just lunch. Your sister Megan is making the trip with her husband, and she's twice as busy as you are. Drama, that was the word. To them, my diagnosed generalized anxiety disorder and recurring depressive episodes were not a medical condition but a character flaw, a performance. My panic attacks were tantrums. My need for quiet and solitude was antisocial behavior. My inability to simply snap out of it was a sign of a weak will. I ended the call with a quiet, "Okay, Mom, I'll see if I can," knowing full well I wouldn't go. The thought of sitting at a table, smiling through the condescending looks and backhanded comments, was enough to make my chest tighten. My sister Megan was often worse than my mother. 4 years older and infinitely more successful in their eyes, she was a high-flying real estate agent with a perfect husband, a perfect house, and a perfectly curated life. She treated my mental health as a personal affront, as if my struggles somehow reflected poorly on her. "You just need to get out more, Isla," she'd say, flipping her perfectly styled hair. "Go to the gym, get a hobby, stop navel-gazing. No one wants to be around someone who's always so morose." The irony was that my hobby, my job, was the one thing that kept me grounded. As an archivist, I spent my days preserving the delicate, forgotten histories of others. I handled brittle letters from soldiers, cataloged faded photographs of families long gone, and pieced together fragmented narratives from dusty municipal records. I gave these stories a permanency and a dignity that I felt was utterly lacking in my own life. In the archives, every detail mattered. Every voice, no matter how small, was part of a larger truth. At home, my voice was just noise. My only real lifeline was Chloe. We'd been friends since college, and she understood me in a way my family never could. She was a graphic designer, vibrant and creative, and saw the world in colors and shapes I often missed. When I called her after speaking with my mom, her voice was a warm contrast to the iciness I'd just endured. "Let me guess," Chloe said, "the attention-seeking speech." "Worse," I sighed, sinking onto my couch. "The it's just drama speech. Megan's going to be there, so of course, I'm expected to perform normalcy for the sake of appearances." "You don't have to perform for anyone, Isla. Your well-being comes first. If they can't understand that, it's their problem, not yours." I knew she was right, but the words still stung. It was a deep, primal hurt that came from being fundamentally misunderstood by the very people who were supposed to know you best. My father had passed away when I was a teenager, and his absence had created a vacuum that my mother and sister filled with judgment and impossibly high standards. He had been the quiet, gentle one in the family, the one who would listen. I often wondered what he would think if he could see how they treated me now. That evening, I decided to do what I always did when I felt overwhelmed. I lost myself in work. I had brought home a box of uncatalogued items from a recent estate donation. The personal effects of a woman named Evelyn Reed, who had passed away without any living relatives. Her house was a time capsule from the 1950s, and the box contained diaries, letters, and photographs. As I carefully lifted a stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon, I felt that familiar sense of connection to the past. Evelyn's hand. D-writing was elegant, the ink slightly blurred in places, as if by tears. She wrote of love, loss, and secret fears. She was real. Her feelings were validated by the simple act of their preservation. I remembered asking my mother once about her own mother, my grandmother, who had died before I was born. Linda always got tight-lipped. She was a difficult woman, was all she'd ever say. It's better not to dwell on the past. This refusal to dwell on the past was a cornerstone of our family's philosophy. Any unpleasantness was to be swept under the rug. Any emotional vulnerability was a weakness to be stamped out. My struggle was an inconvenience to their carefully constructed image of a perfect, problem-free family. My Uncle Mark, my mother's younger brother, was the only one who seemed to operate outside this rigid system. He was a librarian in a nearby town, a gentle soul who, like me, preferred the company of books to people. He'd send me letters and old postcards, understanding my need for tangible, quiet communication. He never pushed or judged, but he lived 3 states away, and his quiet support could only do so much from a distance. As I sat in my apartment, the city lights twinkling outside my window, I felt a profound sense of isolation. I was the curator of everyone's history but my own. My family had effectively erased my narrative, replacing it with one of their own making. Isla the dramatic, Isla the difficult, Isla the attention seeker. They had taken my truth and archived it under fiction. The weight of their words was a physical presence in the room, a heavy blanket smothering the person I was trying so hard to be. Little did I know, a trip back to that very house, the one filled with so much unspoken history, was about to provide me with an archive of my own, one that would change everything. Despite my better judgment and Chloe's fervent advice to the contrary, I ended up going home that weekend. The impromptu lunch had morphed into an early 60-second birthday celebration for my mother, and the guilt she'd expertly layered on during a follow-up call was too much to bear. It would mean so much to me, Isla. It's all I want for my birthday to have both my girls here. The subtext was clear. My presence was a gift, and my absence would be a punishment. So I drove the 2 hours, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my stomach in knots. The family home, a tidy suburban 2-story where I'd spent my childhood, looked exactly the same. The lawn was perfectly manicured, the windows spotless. It was a house that projected an image of order and happiness, a carefully maintained facade that hid the cracks within. The moment I walked through the door, the performance began. "Isla, you made it," my mother chirped, giving me an airy kiss on the cheek that didn't quite land. Her smile was bright but didn't reach her eyes. "See? I knew you could push through it if you really tried." It wasn't a welcome, it was a validation of her belief that my anxiety was a choice. Megan was in the kitchen, directing her husband, Tom, as he ineptly tried to arrange a cheese platter. She looked up, her expression a mixture of surprise and triumph. "Wow, look who decided to grace us with her presence," she said, her voice dripping with saccharine condescension. "Feeling less dramatic today." "Hello, Megan," I said, my voice flatter than I intended. "The house looks nice." "Of course it does. I helped Mom with the new curtains," she replied, as if to underscore her role as the helpful, present daughter. The afternoon was a masterclass in passive aggression. Every compliment my mother paid Megan was a veiled criticism of me. "Megan's firm just closed on that big downtown property. She's a real go-getter." The implication hung in the air. Unlike you, with your dusty, quiet little job, every question directed at me was a setup. "Are you seeing anyone, Isla? It's not healthy to spend so much time alone." I tried to steer the conversation to neutral territory, talking about a fascinating collection I was processing at the archives, but their eyes glazed over. History, to them, was boring. My passion was peculiar. I felt like an anthropologist studying a foreign tribe, except this tribe was my own family. I ate my lunch in small, careful bites, focusing on the mechanics of chewing and swallowing to keep the panic from rising in my chest. The breaking point came, as it often did, over dessert. My mother brought out a cake, and as we sat around the dining table, she clasped her hands together and beamed. "I'm just so happy," she announced to the room. "Having my family here, all happy and healthy, it's all a mother could ask for." Happy and healthy. The words were like a slap in the face. She was erasing my reality again, painting over it with her preferred version of the truth. I felt a surge of something hot and sharp, a mixture of anger and desperation. For once, I didn't want to be silent. "I'm glad you're happy." "Why, Mom?" I said, my voice trembling slightly. "But we're not all healthy. My anxiety, it's not something I can just push through. It's a real illness." The mood at the table shifted instantly. The forced smiles vanished. My mother's face hardened. "Isla, please," she said, her voice low and tight. "Don't ruin your mother's birthday with this negativity." Megan jumped in, her self-appointed role as family defender kicking into high gear. "Unbelievable," she scoffed, setting her fork down with a clatter. "Can't you just have one normal day? One day where it's not all about you and your struggles? You always have to be the center of attention, don't you? It's been like this since we were kids. Anything to get Mom and Dad to look at you." The accusation that I was doing this for attention, especially invoking my late father, was a low blow, and it struck a nerve. "This isn't for attention, Megan," I shot back, my voice rising. "This is my life. I'm sorry it's not as neat and tidy as your real estate listings, but it's real." "Oh, here we go," Megan said, rolling her eyes. "The victim? You love playing the victim, don't you? Everyone else has problems, Isla. They just don't whine about them constantly. They get on with it." "That's enough, both of you," my mother interjected, but her glare was fixed on me. "Megan is right, Isla. You've made your point. Now, let's just try to enjoy the rest of the afternoon." But I couldn't. The facade had shattered. I looked at my mother, at the rigid set of her jaw, and at my sister, her face a mask of smug righteousness. They weren't just misunderstanding me, they were willfully refusing to see me. They were actively choosing their comfortable narrative over my painful truth. In their eyes, I was a problem to be managed, a loose thread in the perfect tapestry they were trying to weave. I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I can't do this," I whispered, the fight draining out of me as quickly as it had appeared. "I'm sorry I ruined your birthday, Mom." I turned and walked out, ignoring my mother's sharp "Isla, come back here," and Megan's muttered "so dramatic." I got in my car and drove, tears blurring the road. It wasn't just the argument that hurt. It was the profound realization that I was utterly alone in my own family. They would never change. They would never see past the labels they had assigned me. The birthday party wasn't a celebration. It was a tribunal where I had once again been found guilty of being myself. As I drove away from the house with its perfect lawn and perfect curtains, I felt a strange sense of finality. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I could never go back to pretending. The betrayal wasn't in their words, but in their absolute refusal to hear mine. The week after the disastrous birthday lunch was a blur of hollow-hearted numbness. I ignored my mother's calls and deleted Megan's text, a single, infuriating message that read, "Hope you're happy now." I threw myself into my work at the archive, finding solace in the quiet order of the past. The dust on old books felt more comforting than my own family's touch. It was during this period of self-imposed exile that I received an unexpected email from my Uncle Mark. The subject line was simple, "Thinking of you." He didn't mention the birthday party. I was sure my mother had given him her heavily editorialized version of events, but his message was a balm. He wrote about a new collection the library had acquired, and then, almost as an afterthought, he added a line that would unknowingly change everything. "Your mother mentioned she's finally planning to clear out the attic, said something about getting rid of old junk. If there are any old family photos or papers, you should try to save them. History, even the messy parts, is worth preserving. You know that better than anyone." My mother, Linda, was the opposite of an archivist. She was a purger. Her mantra was, if you haven't used it in a year, throw it out. The thought of her unilaterally deciding what parts of our family history were junk sent a jolt of panic through me. The attic was my late father's domain. It was where he kept his books, his old woodworking tools, and boxes of things he had deemed important. Since his death, my mother had refused to go up there, and it had remained a dusty, untouched memorial to him. Her sudden urge to purge it felt suspicious. Driven by a protective instinct I didn't fully understand, I decided to go back. I wouldn't call first. I would just show up, armed with a plausible excuse about retrieving a childhood keepsake. I drove to the house on a Tuesday morning when I knew my mother would be at her weekly book club meeting. Letting myself in with the spare key I still had, I was struck by the oppressive silence of the house. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a museum of a life I no longer belonged to. The pull-down ladder to the attic groaned in protest as I lowered it. A wave of musty, time-scented air washed over me. Climbing up, I was met with a landscape of shrouded furniture and cardboard boxes sagging under the weight of years. Sunbeams, thick with dancing dust motes, sliced through the gloom from a single grimy window. I saw the corner my mother had started on. A few boxes had been opened, their contents rifled through, with a new pile of black trash bags sitting ominously nearby. I made my way to the far corner, to the section that was my father's. Tucked away behind an old rocking horse and a stack of his treasured National Geographic magazines was a small, unassuming wooden chest. It wasn't locked. My father had never been one for secrets. I remembered him stowing things away in it, his military service medals, my first baby's shoes, a bundle of letters from his own father. I lifted the heavy lid. On top lay the familiar items I remembered. But underneath them, tucked into a false bottom I never knew existed, was something else entirely. It was a thick, manila envelope, yellowed with age. My mother's name, Linda, was written on the front in my grandmother's spidery, elegant script. My grandmother, the difficult woman my mother never wanted to talk about. My heart began to pound. This was something my father had deliberately hidden. My hands trembled as I opened the unsealed flap. Inside wasn't junk. It was a dense stack of letters, along with a thin, leather-bound journal. I pulled out the journal first. The cover was worn, the name Eleanor embossed in faded gold leaf. My grandmother's name. I sat down on the dusty floorboards, the world outside fading away. I opened the journal to the first page. The entry was dated over 40 years ago, shortly after my mother had left for college. "Linda has been gone a month," it began. "The house is unbearably quiet. She hasn't called. I know she is angry with me, but I hope one day she understands I only did what I thought was best. A diagnosis is not a curse, but a map. It is meant to guide, not to condemn. She sees it as a brand, a mark of shame." Diagnosis? Map. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the delicate cursive. Words and phrases jumped out at me. Her panic, so much like my own. The doctor gave me a name for the shadows I have always lived with: anxiety and agoraphobia. Linda refuses to accept it. She says I am just being dramatic, that I am doing it for attention, to keep her from leaving. The words were eerily familiar. My grandmother wasn't just difficult. She was me. She had been struggling with the same invisible demons that I was. I felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. This wasn't just my grandmother's story, it was my story, written a generation earlier. Then I turned to the letters. They were from my grandmother, Eleanor, addressed to my mother, Linda, during her first year of college. They were filled with a mother's love and concern, but they were also filled with desperate, heartbreaking pleas for understanding. "My dearest Linda," one read, "please don't shut me out. The doctor says there is medication that can help, therapy that can teach me coping mechanisms. But I cannot do it alone. Your dismissal hurts more than the illness itself. Please, just try to understand." Letter after letter told the same story. My grandmother, trying to explain her mental health struggles, and my mother, a world away at college, rejecting it all. The last letter in the stack was different. It wasn't from my grandmother. It was a carbon copy of a doctor's note, dated 2 years before I was born. It was addressed to my mother. Ray, Eleanor Vance. This note is to confirm that your mother, Alina, has been under my care for severe anxiety and panic disorder. Her condition is chronic and has a strong genetic component. It is crucial for her well-being that she has family support and understanding. A strong genetic component. My mother had known, she had known all along. She knew that what I was going through wasn't drama or attention-seeking. She knew it was a real, medical, inheritable condition because she had watched her own mother suffer with it, and she had rejected her then just as she was rejecting me now. The coldness, the dismissal, it wasn't born of ignorance. It was a conscious choice. A pattern repeated. My father must have found these after my grandmother passed and hidden them, perhaps to protect me, or perhaps because he knew my mother would never be able to face them. Sitting there in the dusty attic, holding the proof in my hands, I didn't feel sadness. I felt a cold, clarifying anger. My entire life, I had been made to feel broken, weak, and flawed, but it was all based on a lie. A lie my mother had constructed to bury a history she was ashamed of. They hadn't just dismissed me, they had erased my grandmother. And in doing so, they had tried to erase the most fundamental part of who I was. The secret wasn't just in the attic, it was in my DNA. And for the first time, I felt the overwhelming urge not to hide it, but to put it on display. I left the house like a thief, the manila envelope tucked securely in my bag, its contents feeling as heavy as a lead weight against my side. I drove not to my own quiet apartment, but straight to Chloe's. I needed an anchor, a friendly port in the storm that was raging inside me. When she opened the door and saw my face, pale and grim, she pulled me inside without a word. We sat at her kitchen table, the vibrant, cheerful room a stark contrast to my mood. I laid the journal and the letters out on the smooth wooden surface. My mother has been lying to me my entire life, I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. Chloe listened patiently as I recounted the story, her expression shifting from confusion to shock and finally to a quiet, simmering fury on my behalf. She picked up one of the letters, her designer's eye tracing the elegant script. "Isla, this is unbelievable," she breathed. She knew. She had a doctor's note. She didn't just know, I corrected, a new, harder edge to my voice. She lived it. She watched her own mother go through the exact same thing, the same words she uses on me, drama. Attention-seeking, my grandmother wrote them in her journal. My mother learned them from her. No, that wasn't right. My grandmother wrote that my mother used those words on her. My mother hadn't learned the dismissal. She had invented it, at least within our family line. For the rest of the afternoon, Chloe and I became historical detectives. We pieced together the narrative from the faded ink. My grandmother, Alina, was a woman trapped not only by her illness, but by the ignorance of her time and the cold shoulder of her own daughter. Her journal entries painted a portrait of a deeply sensitive and intelligent woman who was terrified of the world outside her home, but even more terrified of the judgment within it. She wrote about good days, where she could tend her garden, and bad days, where the thought of walking to the mailbox was a monumental task. The letters to my mother were the most damning. They showed a progression from hopeful outreach to resigned sorrow. Alina tried to build a bridge, but Linda, my mother, systematically dismantled it, stone by stone. "Your father tells me you're thriving," Alina wrote in one letter. "I am so proud, but I wish you would share your life with me. My world has become so small, and your silence makes it smaller still." Chloe, ever the pragmatist, shifted from emotional support to strategic thinking. "Okay," she said, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the doctor's note. "So what now? What do you do with this?" "I don't know," I admitted. "A part of me wants to drive back there right now and throw these in her face. But what would that accomplish? She'd just deny it, call me a liar, say I'm making things up to cause more drama." "She might," Chloe agreed. "But this is different. This isn't your word against hers anymore. This is proof. This is a primary source document, Isla. It's your language." She was right. For years, I had been fighting a battle with no weapons, trying to describe an invisible enemy to people who refused to believe it existed. Now I had evidence. Tangible, undeniable history. My archivist instincts kicked in, overriding the emotional turmoil. This was a collection that needed to be processed, organized, and presented. The story it told was too important to be lost or shouted down in another messy, emotional confrontation. It needed to be laid out with irrefutable clarity. The next day, I called my Uncle Mark. I didn't tell him what I had found, not yet. I kept the conversation light, asking him questions about his mother, my grandmother Aliner. "What do you remember about her?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Mark sighed, a wistful sound over the phone line. "Oh, she was a wonderful woman, Isla, very gentle, artistic. She painted beautiful watercolors, but she was a homebody, had a hard time leaving the house. Your mother, Linda, always had a problem with that. She saw it as a weakness." "Did you know why?" I pressed gently. "We didn't have the words for it back then," he said sadly. "People just called her nervous or high-strung. I was just a kid, so I didn't question it. Linda was older, already in high school. She was always embarrassed by it, always trying to push Mom to be more normal. It caused a lot of friction between them." His words confirmed everything. He was an unknowing witness, providing context and corroboration for the documents I held. My mother's shame and embarrassment had curdled into cruelty over the years. She hadn't just disagreed with her mother, she had been ashamed of her. And now, she was ashamed of me for the same reason. I was a living reminder of the part of her history she had tried to bury. The investigation wasn't just about my grandmother anymore. It was about understanding the very foundation of my family's dysfunction. It was a genetic thread of anxiety, met with a generational pattern of denial. My mother and sister weren't just being unkind, they were perpetuating a cycle of trauma, a legacy of silence and shame. They had appointed themselves the gatekeepers of our family's narrative, and they had written me out of it, just as they had written Aliner out before me. I spent the next week meticulously working with the materials. I scanned every page of the journal and every letter. I transcribed key passages. I cross-referenced dates from the journal with events my uncle had mentioned. I was building a case, not for a jury, but for myself, for my own sanity. Each word I scanned, each sentence I transcribed, was an act of reclamation. I was taking back the story that had been stolen from me and from the grandmother I never knew. The faded ink on the old paper seemed to grow darker, more potent with every passing day. It was no longer just a collection of sad memories from a dusty attic. It was a weapon. It was a key. It was the truth. And I, the family archivist, the quiet curator of other people's stories, was about to present my most important collection yet. The anger I felt was no longer hot and chaotic. It was cold, focused, and purposeful. I was ready to declassify our family's biggest secret. The idea came to me not in a moment of anger, but in the quiet, methodical space of my own archive. I was sitting at my desk, carefully placing a 19th century photograph into a mylar sleeve, my movements precise and respectful. This is what I do, I thought. I take disparate, fragile pieces of the past, and I organize them to tell a clear, undeniable story. I provide context, I reveal the truth, and I preserve it. Why should my own history be treated any differently? A direct confrontation, throwing the letters in my mother's face, would devolve into shouting. They would call me hysterical, and the evidence would be lost in the emotional wreckage. An email could be deleted, a phone call hung up on. No, the presentation had to be as deliberate and irrefutable as the archives I curated. It needed to be a physical exhibit, an experience they couldn't ignore or twist. My plan began to take shape. My mother's birthday had been the catalyst for the final break, so it felt fitting that the revelation would happen at another family gathering. A quick check of the calendar revealed the perfect opportunity. Their wedding anniversary was in 3 weeks. They always hosted a small, formal dinner. It was the perfect stage. For the next 3 weeks, my apartment transformed into a workshop. Chloe was my co-conspirator and project manager, her graphic design skills proving invaluable. "If we're going to do this, we're doing it right," she declared, her eyes gleaming with a fierce loyalty that warmed my heart. "This needs to be professional, clinical, unemotional. That's what will hit them the hardest." Our first step was to digitize everything. We created high-resolution scans of every single page of Aliner's journal, all her letters to Linda, the doctor's note, and even some of her watercolor paintings that I'd found in the chest, which my Uncle Mark had described. The paintings were beautiful and delicate, mostly still lifes of flowers and objects from within a home. They were the work of a woman who saw beauty in a small, confined world. Then we started designing. We weren't just going to hand them a stack of papers. We were going to create a museum-quality presentation. We decided to create 3 identical, custom-bound books. Each book would be titled simply, The Aliner Vance Archive. Inside, each page was laid out with professional precision. On the left side of a spread, we'd have a high-quality image of the original document, the letter in its elegant script, the journal entry in its emotional scrawl. On the right side, we'd have a clean, typed transcription. We added footnotes, providing context. For example, a journal entry about being unable to attend a neighbor's party was cross-referenced with my uncle's memory of my grandmother's nervous spells. The most powerful section was the one we called Echoes. On the left, we display a direct quote from Aliner's journal like, "Linda insists I am just being dramatic to get attention." On the right, under the heading AL, circa 2024, I wrote a corresponding memory of my own. During a family dinner, Megan and Linda told me I was ruining the evening with my drama and that I always needed to be the center of attention. We created dozens of these side-by-side comparisons. It was a devastating, irrefutable pattern of language and behavior, laid bare in black and white. Chloe designed a simple, elegant cover for the books, a deep navy blue with the title in a simple, gold serif font. They looked like historical dissertations. Serious, factual, impossible to dismiss as a hysterical rant. To accompany the books, we prepared a centerpiece for the anniversary dinner. I found a beautiful, multi-paned picture frame. In the central pane, I placed a lovely, smiling photograph of my grandmother Aliner that I'd found in the chest. In the surrounding panes, I didn't put pictures. Instead, I carefully mounted short, powerful quotes from her journal, printed in a clean, beautiful font. A diagnosis is not a curse, but a map. I cannot do it alone. Your dismissal hurts more than the illness itself. I hope one day she understands. The final piece of the plan was a single, sealed envelope addressed to my Uncle Mark. Inside was a flash drive containing all the scanned documents and a letter from me, explaining everything. I would mail it to him the day before the dinner. He deserved to know the truth from me, not from the fallout of the explosion that was sure to come. He was the one person who had shown me kindness, and I wanted to honor that. I also knew that, should my mother and sister try to destroy the evidence, there would be a secure off-site backup. An archivist always protects the collection. As we packed the 3 books into a handsome presentation box, Chloe looked at me. "Are you ready for this, Isla? Once you do this, there's no going back." I looked at the finished products. They were beautiful, tragic, and powerful. They were the culmination of a lifetime of being silenced. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. It was about honoring the grandmother I never knew and reclaiming the identity I had been denied. "I know," I said, my voice steady for the first time in weeks. "Going back isn't an option anyway. They closed that door. I'm just archiving the moment for them." The anger was still there, a cold, hard stone in my gut, but it was now overlaid with a profound sense of purpose. I was no longer the subject of the story, the emotional, unreliable narrator. I was the archivist, and I was about to present my findings. The evening of my parents' anniversary felt surreal. I dressed with care, choosing a simple, elegant black dress. I wanted to look composed, serious. When I arrived at the house, the presentation box in my hands, I felt a strange calm settle over me. It was the focus that came with knowing exactly what you had to do. Megan and her husband Tom were already there, laughing with my mother in the living room. The scene was a perfect tableau of domestic bliss. When they saw me, the laughter stopped. "Isla," my mother said, her voice strained, "I'm surprised you came." "I wouldn't miss your anniversary, Mom," I replied smoothly, meeting her gaze without flinching. Megan eyed the box in my hands. "What's that? Did you bring us a work project?" she asked with a little laugh, trying to dismiss me with her usual brand of condescension. "In a way," I said. "It's a gift. A family history project I've been working on. I thought tonight would be the perfect time to share it." I could see the confusion on their faces. This was not the broken, weepy Isla they were used to. This was someone else. Someone they didn't recognize. We moved to the dining room, which was set with the good china and silver. Before anyone else could sit, I walked to the head of the table and placed the multi-paned picture frame in the center, where a floral arrangement would normally be. I turned it so the picture of my grandmother, surrounded by her own words, faced my mother. Linda froze, her hand halfway to her chair. "What is this?" she whispered, staring at the face of her own mother. "That's Grandma Leaner," I said, my voice even and clear. "I thought she should be here for the celebration." Megan squinted at the frame. "What does it say? Your dismissal hurts more than the illness itself." She looked from the frame to me, her face a mask of bewildered anger. "What kind of sick joke is this, Isla?" "It's not a joke," I said, turning to the box. I opened it and took out the 3 navy blue books. I walked around the table and placed one in front of my mother. I placed one in front of Megan, and I placed the third one in front of the empty seat beside me. "It's history." My mother stared at the title, the Aliner Vance Archive, as if it were a venomous snake. She didn't open it. Megan, however, snatched hers up and flipped it open, her impatience getting the better of her. I watched her face as she saw the first few pages, the scans of her grandmother's letters, the typed transcriptions. Her expression shifted from anger to confusion. She flipped faster, her eyes darting back and forth. She stopped cold on one of the Echo's pages. I knew which one it was, the one that quoted her, word for word, dismissing my struggles at the birthday party, set directly beside her grandmother's journal entry describing my mother doing the same thing 40 years prior. The color drained from her face. What is this?" she stammered, looking at my mother. Linda still hadn't moved. She was staring at the picture. Ray of her mother, her face pale and slack. "I found them in the attic, Mom," I said, my voice dropping into the silent room. "In Dad's old chest, her journal, all the letters you ignored. The doctor's note you received that explained her condition, the one with a strong genetic component." I let that phrase hang in the air. "I know you knew," I continued, my gaze locked on my mother. "I know you've known my entire life that what I have is real. You knew because you watched your own mother suffer from it, but you were ashamed of her, so you silenced her. You buried her story. And then, when you saw the same illness in me, you did the exact same thing. You called me dramatic. You called me an attention seeker. You used my pain as an excuse to control me and make me feel small, all to avoid facing the part of your own history you were ashamed of." My mother finally looked up from the frame, her eyes filled not with remorse but with a dawning horror, the horror of being exposed. "You went through my things," she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "You brought this filth into my house on my anniversary." "This isn't filth, Mom. This is your mother's life," I said, my voice rising with a strength I didn't know I possessed. "This is the truth you spent 40 years trying to erase. And this," I said, tapping my own book, "is my truth." Megan slammed her book shut. "This is insane. You're insane, Isla. You cooked up this whole conspiracy theory to hurt us." But her words lacked conviction. Her eyes kept darting back to the book, to the undeniable proof. Tom, her husband, looked utterly lost, shifting his gaze between us like a spectator at a tennis match from hell. "Am I?" I asked Megan calmly. "Read page 47. It's a letter where your grandmother begs for understanding. Then read page 48, the Echoes page. See if any of it sounds familiar." My mother pushed her chair back violently, standing up. "Get out," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Take your lies and your poison and get out of my house." "I will," I said, picking up my purse. "But you should know, I sent a copy of everything to Uncle Mark. He deserved to know the truth about the sister he loved. So you can't burn these books. You can't pretend this never happened. This story is no longer yours to control. I looked from my sister's stunned face to my mother's contorted one. I saw no sadness, no regret, no glimmer of understanding. I saw only the rage of people whose carefully constructed world had just been shattered by an inconvenient truth. "Happy anniversary," I said quietly. Then I turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving the 3 books and the portrait of my grandmother sitting on the table behind me. I didn't look back. The last family dinner was over. The drive home was quiet. I didn't cry. I didn't feel the usual post-confrontation wave of anxiety and regret. Instead, I felt empty. But it wasn't a bad emptiness. It was a clean, quiet, and peaceful emptiness. The emptiness of a room that has finally been cleared of clutter. The silence that follows a storm. When I got home, I called Chloe. "It's done," I said. "How are you?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "I'm okay," I replied, and I was surprised to find that it was true. "I think I'm really okay." The next 2 days were silent. I heard nothing from my mother or my sister. The silence was their answer. It was a confirmation of everything I had presented. There was no apology, no angry phone call, no attempt at an explanation. They couldn't deny the evidence, so they chose to erase me instead. The family narrative was more important than the family itself. On the 3rd day, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was my Uncle Mark. His voice was thick with emotion. "Isla, I got your package. I've spent the last 48 hours reading everything and looking through the old photo albums." He trailed off, and I heard him take a shaky breath. "I had no idea. I was just a boy. I remember she was sad sometimes, but I never understood. Your mother, Linda, she never told me." "I know, Uncle Mark," I said softly. "What you did, Isla, it was brave," he continued. "My sister is a proud woman, too proud. She's called me 3 times since yesterday, trying to spin the story, telling me you're unstable and vindictive. But the letters don't lie. I see our mother in them, and I see you. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry they made you carry this alone." His words were the validation I had craved my entire life, and they hadn't come from the people I'd spent years trying to please, but from the one person who had always been quietly in my corner. We talked for over an hour, sharing memories of my father and him sharing stories of his mother that I'd never heard before. He told me about her love for gardening, her quiet sense of humor, the way she would hum when she painted. He was giving me back the grandmother my mother had tried to steal. A week later, a large manila envelope arrived for me. It was from my mother's address, but the handwriting was Megan's. Inside, there was no letter, just the key to the family home that I had kept on my keyring for over a decade. The message was clear. I was no longer welcome. I was officially disowned. I held the key in my palm. A few months ago, this would have shattered me. Now, it felt like a release. I dropped it into my kitchen junk drawer without a second thought. It was just a piece of metal, a key to a house that had never truly been a home. Life after the confrontation began to settle into a new rhythm. The constant, low-level hum of anxiety that had been the background music of my life started to fade. The dread of the next phone call, the next family gathering, was gone. In its place was a quiet, expansive freedom. I was no longer defined by their judgment. I started thriving. With the energy I used to spend managing my family's expectations, I poured myself into my work and my own well-being. I proposed a new community outreach program at the archives, helping local families preserve their own histories. I started painting, inspired by the watercolors of the grandmother I now felt I knew. Chloe and I took a weekend trip to the coast, and I didn't have a single panic attack. I never heard from my mother or sister again. Through the grapevine of distant family relatives, I heard that Megan and her husband moved a few towns over, and that my mother became even more reclusive. They had chosen their narrative, their fortress of denial, and had locked themselves inside it. Perhaps they were happy there. I realized it no longer mattered to me. My story didn't end with a tearful reunion or a dramatic apology. It ended with a quiet closing of a book. My revenge wasn't loud and explosive. It was the meticulous, undeniable presentation of the truth. I didn't destroy them, I simply held up a mirror, and they could not bear the reflection. They chose to walk away from the mirror rather than face what was in it. My name is Isla, and I am an archivist. I spent years feeling like a footnote in my own family's history, a story they kept trying to edit and redact. But by uncovering the truth of the past, I was finally able to write my own future. My life is now my own collection, and every day feels like a clean, unwritten page waiting for a story that is entirely and finally mine.